Welcome back, everybody. Happy to be back with Kentucky Ed.Talk, Kentucky Teachers in the Know. This is our first show for 2022. So Happy New Year to everyone, and hoping everyone's staying safe out there in the snow and crazy weather that's continuing to be unpredictable across all of Kentucky. So happy to be joined with my colleague and partner in crime, Allison Sloan. And then also tonight, we welcome our special guest, Commissioner of Education, Mr. Jason Glass. Allison, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. It is nice to be back on here. I think our last one was in November, Jamie, I think, to introduce the Conference for a Cause. So I'm going to start with that a little bit tonight because Dr. Glass was one of our winners of our first awards, and he received the Decision Maker Award, which all of our members voted on. So I'm going to give him a moment. He made a great video for us to show at the conference, but as techie as Jamie and I are, yes, there's his awards. We were not able to get that video to work that day. So I hated that. I keep trying to figure it out so maybe we can post it in the group, but so far I've not been very lucky on that. So I'm going to let you speak to the members for that award or about the award for just a moment, Dr. Glass.
Wow. Well, I'm so sorry that didn't work out. I'll try to channel everything that I was trying to say. And I guess we recorded that about in November or something. Mm-hmm. So, well, it's an incredible honor, and hats off to Allison, you and Jamie, and the work that you've done around Kentucky Teachers in the Know. It's really an incredible resource, a way for educators to share their thoughts and keep up with things that are going on. So I am sort of a lurker on there. I watch the conversations and pay attention. I just think it's important that I don't weigh in on those. It's just I think it's good for me to just keep a pulse on things, but not to try and tip the scales in any way. But it's been a huge benefit to me, and I know it's a great benefit to other educators in the state, just to stay connected and be able to have a space where you can have a conversation and talk about what things are on people's minds. And to have the members of the group award me with this Decision Maker Award is incredible. Just from and humbling, just because I know the caliber of decision makers that you have in Kentucky, people like Governor Beshear and Lou Young and the rest of the members of the Board of Education. And we've got some incredible legislators, some incredible educators, and people that are really exceptional advocates for public education. So I'm honored to get it and appreciate the accolade. And I do have the award here with me in my home office in a place of honor. So it's just great. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And a lot of the people you mentioned are in our group in Kentucky Teachers in the Know, and we're very proud of that. We try our best to be a space that's safe for people to talk, to lurk, as you said, too. That was one of our main goals, is so that people who do make decisions can see and hear what our educators and people that work in our public school systems are feeling and what they're needing and the resources and things like that. So we're very proud of that. And I think our conference was great this year. To take a moment to review that a little bit, it was wonderful. We had a great in-person banquet for those that won awards, and our guest panelist as well. It was nice to have Dr. Pruitt, a former commissioner in Kentucky, there in person as well. So that was nice to bring him back. But it was a great day, and we were very glad to give awards to other people, because that's one thing that I love to do more than anything, is to recognize the hard work of our teachers and our educators and other people in the field who do things that help make our students as successful as they possibly can be. So with that said, it is the 2022 legislative session. And for the first time in a while, we've got a normal session, if you want to call it normal. I'm not sure that's a word we can use, but it is a session, and we've got lots of education bills moving in and out. One of the first things that has come out recently is the governor's budget proposal. And then I think the House Republicans put out a budget proposal prior to that. So if we want to take just a minute, Dr. Glass, to kind of talk about 2 or 3 of the highlights that are part of those budget proposals and what we're promoting, what we hope to see in the future, and what comes out of those.
Sure. Yeah, be happy to. Well, I think we've got good news and a great starting point from these 2 budgets. I won't get into all of the horse race analogies about whose budget came out first and all the excitement about that. But I think just if we step back and objectively try to look at the 2 budgets that we have, we're in a great starting place. Mm-hmm. The House budget came out early. It contains much better increases to education funding than we've seen in the last several years. There's funding in there for increases to SEEK. There's funding to increase transportation costs or offset transportation costs in districts. There's full funding for kindergarten. There's money for employees and for state employees and for school district employees to get raises. So there's a lot of positive things in the House budget that I think we should be excited about. So I think it met a lot of the concerns that people had around we've seen record inflation, maybe not record, but we've seen larger than we've seen probably in the past 15 years, inflation push up. And that has a real effect on the standard of living that people have. And so we have to be able to allow our employees in schools and at the state to keep up with that standard of living, or else they are losing ground. So those are good moves. There's also provisions within it that help stabilize the Kentucky teacher retirement system. So it makes a significant contribution to that. And so that all of these are positive steps. So, but I think if we can look at the House budget and say that that's good, we can look at the governor's budget and say that that's great, because I think it does most of the things or all of the things that the House budget does. And then it goes a step further. Notably, it adds full day preschool funding, universal preschool program. So that's long been a policy goal for education advocates in Kentucky. And this is a huge lift. And to get it off the ground, the state has the funding available to do it. So that's tremendous. The evidence around early childhood education is really clear. We can talk about, I think, Allison, one of the elements you wanted to talk about a little more deeply was pre-K, what might happen with that. So we'll not steal our own thunder and go too deeply into that. But that's an element of the governor's budget that's there. It goes further in increasing SEEK funding. It goes further in clarifying what the increases would be to school district employees at 5%. Raises. It goes further in covering the costs of transportation in schools. And then it adds some provisions around career technical education. It adds additional resources above and beyond what the House has for higher education. So those are really good things. It adds a tuition offset program for teachers that come out of colleges and universities and then take jobs as teachers in the state. It pays them back for up to $3,000 of tuition for every year that they work in a public school in Kentucky. So these are elements of the governor's bill that aren't present in the House bill and go further. So I think, again, we've got a good budget coming out of the House. We have a great budget from the governor. Just looking at the political landscape of the way that the legislature is arrayed, we have a supermajority of Republicans. So at the end of the day, I expect that we'll end up with something closer to what the House budget is, because they can pass whatever they want without really having to confer with the Democrats or with the governor on it. But I think if there are any elements of the governor's bill that the Republicans look at and go, hey, maybe that's a good idea, and they pick that up, that's just a positive for us. And so honestly, I hope some of those things happen. We end up with a few provisions that get picked up. And I think one of the governor's goals was just to sort of awaken people to what was possible with the ongoing funding that the state has and the one-time funding that the state has, to orient them to, hey, you could have all of this. And I think that move was successful. So even though the governor doesn't really have any political power to influence the budget process directly, nor do Democrats have the numbers in either chamber to influence the process directly, I think it has been successful at raising up in people's minds what we could do with the budget that we have. But I don't want to run down the House budget. It's a good start, a really good start. So I think we should be thankful for that.
Good. That's great to hear. I'm like you. I hope that, just having the conversations and talking about what's possible in the long run, hopefully in the future, that leads to more meeting in the middle and finding those common grounds and adding things from both budgets or future budgets and stuff, so that we continue to make public education a priority in legislative sessions from here on out. Jamie, you want to ask a question?
Sure, Commissioner. Before we went live, you've been commissioner officially since September of 20. I can't even begin to fathom what that road's been like. Obviously, COVID has kept every day unpredictable. So as we continue to navigate that and the unknowns moving forward, but also one of the other things we're dealing with is a lot of hot button topic issues that are even national issues. One of the ones that our General Assembly is dealing with now is around CRT. I know the department has spoken and testified to a lot of other committee meetings. So speak to what's happening in and around the conversation with critical race theory in Kentucky and what you see happening in this session as well.
Yeah, well, we saw these bills start to emerge this summer in Kentucky in the pre-filed versions, but we saw them in other states in the last legislative session. So in the spring of last year, we saw them move in some other states and actually be enacted in some other states, notably Oklahoma, North Carolina, Tennessee. So those were some states that passed some of New Hampshire even passed some of these bills. And so these are the two pre-filed bills were largely sort of copycat bills from other states. They don't call out critical race theory directly as something that they're trying to limit or ban. There's each of them has a list of categories that or create things that are not allowed to be talked about in school, or they create different penalties for either the school system losing funding if there's a verified case that one of those provisions was violated, or the educator stands at risk of losing their license if that happens. So those are sort of the two penalties that are set up. The legislature did hold a committee hearing on it this summer. They did ask me to testify on it. It was right around the 4th of July, so right in the middle of summer. At that point, a lot of what I talked about is that this is not something that's typically taught in K-12 education. It may appear in some courses that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but even diversity, equity, and inclusion, I was clear to say, is not the same thing as critical race theory. Critical race theory is a legal or an academic higher education theory that asks the question, seeks to answer the question, why, if we have legally outlawed discrimination, why does it continue to exist in the country? And it posits some reasons for that, including systemic reasons or different levels of privilege or advantage that some groups historically have that create ongoing inequities and differences. And so if you were in a high school course that was studying those kinds of issues, or maybe even a sociology class or something that was studying those kinds of issues, I think you'd be right to touch on critical race theory, because it's one of the concepts that's out there that tries to answer some of the key questions, but it's not something that most students are going to experience going through school. What we did see is just in the wake of George Floyd's murder and Breonna Taylor, her killing, and the other just unrest that happened in the summer of 2020, we saw some of the concepts and ideas that were lifted up in critical race theory around systemic bias, implicit bias, privilege, start to appear in seminars and experiences that educators were having, just as a way to try to understand why is this continuing to happen. Again, we don't have laws that say that police should raid or kill Black people, but this is still happening. So that was part of this effort, is to sort of uncover why is this occurring. So we started to see those kinds of things come out in some of the professional development trainings that teachers were having, and then occasionally we may have seen some of those experiences happen as they were replicated in classrooms. So I think that is the issue that the Republicans and these two bill sponsors are concerned about. They feel, and I won't speak for them, but I think that they're offended at the concepts within critical race theory that sort of attack meritocracy. In other words, everybody should sort of pull themselves up by their bootstraps and work really hard and do the best that they can, and then good things happen as a result of that. They're offended by that concept just from an American values standpoint. They're also upset at any sort of notion that someone is either inherently advantaged or disadvantaged because of their skin or their station in life, or that those experiences carry with them any sort of prejudice going forward, that because you've had certain experiences that would lead you to be a racist or to lead you to be a victim. And so I think we're, again, don't speak for the bill sponsors, but I think they're feeling that those concepts are un-American, and they don't want them taught in public schools, and that's a lot of where that's coming from. When I talked to the legislative committee this summer, one of the things that I talked some about was even though there are some concepts within critical race theory that may be offensive or un-American, some might say, the answer to that, I don't think, is to go become even more un-American and to try and limit the free exchange of ideas and free speech, especially with these sorts of bills that are really vaguely written as to what they're trying to limit. So I think that's a major problem in that these are the sorts of bills that seek to limit conversations, keep people from talking about uncomfortable, painful, historical moments in our country's history. And so some historians have called them memory bills. And they're for that reason that they intend to limit or snuff out the memories of some of these historical events. And memory laws are used by some of the most horrible autocratic governments in history do this sort of thing. So you look at like Vladimir Putin's handbook. These are the kinds of behaviors that you see him using, or other autocrats, both on the fascist or communist side of the political equation. You see these kinds of tactics being used. So I think it should cause all of us some trouble that they're being proposed in the Kentucky legislature right now. So that's I think a major problem, and is that we're following in the footsteps of a really autocratic policy. The second major concern is that they limit free speech and the free exchange of ideas within classrooms. So they may violate our own constitution. I think if one of these passes in the state, we'll almost certainly have a constitutional challenge to it. So I think that should trouble Republicans that are considering this as well. And I think they violate the Republicans' value around local control and decision making. Curricular decisions are made at the local level in Kentucky. And so now you have the state lawmaking body reaching into a classroom and saying what can and cannot be taught very directly, and establishing consequences if an educator violates that. So I think those are all things that the legislature should take pause on as they consider this. One of the more troubling elements of these bills is their vagueness. So they, for example, they talk about if something is discussed in a classroom that makes a student uncomfortable, then that is illegal and could therefore lead to the school district losing funding or the teacher losing their license. Well, there's all sorts of things that we talk about as a former social studies teacher that are uncomfortable concepts. For example, if you listen to My Old Kentucky Home and sing along with the lyrics to My Old Kentucky Home, well, Stephen Foster was writing about a slave who had been sold and forcibly moved away from his family, who was thinking about them and missing them. Well, that's uncomfortable. That's really an uncomfortable and melancholy song. So do we lose My Old Kentucky Home when we ban things that make people uncomfortable in our schools? And is it worth it? So I think I really hope that the legislature slows down here and considers what values they're having to step over and hold down in order to pass something like this. I'm not sure if these will move this session or not. I haven't seen a lot of enthusiasm about them from the leadership in the legislature. We have some really strong and quality Republican conservative legislators in Kentucky who I think are troubled by the language that's in these for the reasons that I've talked about. And so I don't think that this is a freight train that cannot be stopped. But I do hope that if we end up passing something related to them, it doesn't go to the point of gagging conversations that happen in schools, that need to happen in schools, so our students have a full and rich understanding of our country's wonderful and very challenging past.
Yeah, Commissioner, you mentioned a key stakeholder in that, and you mentioned the student. And frequently the student is left out of the conversation when it comes to policies. Obviously, Kentucky's making great growth in that. We have the Pritchard Student Voice Group. You have your own student council that you meets regularly, the Student Council Association in Kentucky. Students got very active last session because of some bills that were up, and they've been very active on this bill too. So what kind of things are you hearing from students around their concerns around this bill? Because ultimately, as you mentioned, they're the ones that ultimately impacted around what we can and can't do based on whatever laws we pass, right?
Well, I think the students are right to be concerned about this. I mean, ultimately, not only does this threaten and limit the teacher's ability to talk about these concepts, it directly limits the free speech of the students. And the General Assembly a few years ago passed a law saying that none of the constitutional rights of students would be abridged in public schools. So what does that statute mean if you lay one of these anti-CRT statutes against it? I'm not sure how that would even be enforced or what it would look like. But that'll be their problem to sort out. Again, I don't know if this is going to move. I mean, it gets everyone really angry and excited to talk about it. But honestly, we've got far bigger concerns. We are still working our way through a pandemic that has obviously devastated learning outcomes and social emotional wellness of our students, and we're not through that yet. So that's a major concern. We have disruptions related to tornadoes in the state that we have to work through. We've got record opportunities to do positive things when it comes to public education with the funding available. So there are we've got both real challenges that are much bigger than this issue, and we've got real opportunities that are much bigger than this issue. So I think, I urge everybody to keep your eyes on the ball here, right? What's really important is the learning experience of the student and what we can do to not only catch them up, but accelerate them and change the learning experience for our students going forward in a way that prepares them for the global economy that they're going to walk into when they leave our schools, that they're already in. And how can we take advantage of the opportunities and resources that we have? So these CRT bills are really politically sparky. They get everybody's attention. But I just hope that we can stay focused on the big picture and not get distracted by these sort of culture war bills brought home to public education.
I agree, Dr. Glass. I think also this kind of leads to one of the topics that I wanted to hit on tonight is that's kind of the negative attack on public education. It's a national problem. It's a state problem. It's a local level. This I think is just one of those things that like you said, it's just something that is kind of sparks people up, gets them started, gets them concerned and angry, and gets people on both sides of the aisle pointing fingers at each other, often about things they don't even know what they're talking about. So many times we've, as teachers have been told you shouldn't be teaching that CRT stuff. And then when you ask them what it is, they have no idea what they're even talking about. And I think that goes along with a lot of other things. And this somewhat of an attack on public education is impacting our classrooms right along with the pandemic. And we're losing teachers. We're not keeping teachers. We're not getting more teachers. We've seen in other states, I believe it was Oklahoma, that some of their universities have had to stop their teacher ed programs because they didn't have enough people registered to even keep it going, to justify being able to keep it going. So those are things that we're seeing, and our teachers are very concerned. One of our teachers, Austin Riley, is a Fayette County public school teacher. She reached out and asked that we ask your thoughts on that, and what are the KBE and KDE doing about teacher retention and getting more teachers into the field.
Well, that's a huge problem and a question as well, Allison. I want to circle back just on the CRT issue for one more moment, and then
Sure.
let's get into the educator workforce challenges that you're talking about. And I want to do that just to make a clear distinction between work around diversity, equity, inclusion, and critical race theory, and to clearly say that these are not the same thing. While the Venn diagram may overlap at some point, depending on which aspects of this you're working on and talking about, diversity, equity, and inclusion work really is about valuing the stories, the history, the contributions, the futures of all people. And trying to understand the commonalities across human experiences and value and appreciate those. So to me, that's diversity and that's inclusion, and making sure. Well, that's diversity, recognizing and understanding all of those stories and contributions and challenges. That is a diversity. When it comes to equity, it's a recognition that all of our people in our schools, all of our families and students, they come to us with different challenges and needs. And so we have to adapt, we have to change the experience for a students to meet where they are. As a special education teacher, you know this very well. When we think about a student who has a disability, of course, we have to adapt their educational experience to give them what they need to be successful. And the same thing might be said for students that come from disadvantaged backgrounds, who maybe haven't had quality early childhood experiences, or students that are coming into our schools that are having to learn English as a second language, or that have a disability. All of these are equity challenges that we have to proactively work against. And then inclusion, just to touch on that last point, that to me really means that it emphasizes the public part of public education. That public schools are a place for any child and any family where anyone can come and receive an education and be prepared for the future. And I think that's a moral commitment that we have as public educators. So while oftentimes these critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion, these are painted with the same brush, I will just say clearly that they're not the same thing. And then I think just to pivot to the question that you raised around the educator workforce. We really do have a challenge before us now that is manifesting itself because we have the simultaneous problem of too few people entering the education profession and too many people leaving the education profession, which is we've been hearing the warning bells about this for years, and now it's finally coming home to roost. And why would we expect anything different? We've seen 15 years of concentrated attacks on the institution of public education and on public educators as people and as professionals. We've seen the devaluing of the profession. We've seen the deconstruction of pension systems and devaluing of compensation systems, both in direct compensation and with benefits, to the point that it's not as financially lucrative anymore. So for all the power that legislatures have when it comes to education, one of the things that they cannot repeal is the law of supply and demand. So if you lower the incentives to be a public educator to a certain level, the market will respond to that, and it will respond with a shortage, which is exactly what we're experiencing right now. We do see efforts in the House bill and in the governor's budget to do something about that. I think that's overdue, and it may not be enough. We didn't get ourselves into this situation overnight, and we're probably not going to work our way out of it. But I think compensation is part of the equation, and trying to catch our educators up to what's been lost in terms of cost of living or inflationary raises, try to establish education as a way that people can clearly grow into a solid middle-class life. A professional livable wage for people that work in education should always be our goal. So we'll make some progress around that. But then I think this whole larger conversation around how we value education and how we value educators. We've got a lot of work to do around that, because back to the CRT discussion, it really has become politicized, where we want to paint someone as a villain, right? And this person is our enemy, and that's been done to public education. One final point that I'd love to hear just both of your thoughts and feedback on this. While I think the attackers of public education have been really active at these attacks and at degrading public education, I also think some of it falls upon us as educators as well. And let me clarify what I mean by that. We talk all the time about what we don't have and how underfunded, underpaid, overworked, stressed, our buildings are falling down. We can't keep quality people. We can't get quality people. We have outdated everything. And then we turn around and we ask the public for support. Well, I guess I think all those things are real. So I don't think we should be like singing and trying to cover all of these challenges that are real. But I also think that we don't do enough to emphasize the positive things that are happening every day in our public schools, and the heroes that we have and the miracles that occur every day in our public schools, because those things are happening as well. Because you would never hear the CEO of some company step out and say, I can't get enough talented people. I can't get the raw materials I need to be successful. I don't have the right engineering. I don't have the scientific know-how that I need. Would you invest in my product? Would you buy my product? You would never hear somebody say that, but we do that in public education all the time. So I again don't think that we should be sweeping under the rug the real challenges we have, but I say that to make a point that we don't often do enough to lift up the great positive things that are happening in our schools.
Dr. Glass, I'd like to reply to that on two notes. One, absolutely, I agree. I've said, and I've been known to say many times, that we do not celebrate each other enough in districts, in our schools at the local level. We just don't. We have this mindset, and I think a culture that we've built for so long that I'm afraid as an administrator or a colleague that if I brag on so-and-so, somebody else is going to get jealous, or someone else is going to get their feelings hurt because I didn't brag on them. Or we don't want anybody to know a whole lot about what's going on, because even if we let the good news out, then it's easier to let the bad news out. And we want to make sure everything stays on a level playing field. And I've seen this for many, many years. I've been around for 23 years, and it's always very disheartening to me, because I always want to tell people, I think the more you celebrate people and the more you celebrate and tell the good things that's happening in your schools and in your classrooms and with each other, the more that becomes the norm. If you don't celebrate those things, then yes, it very much becomes a norm that if you do happen to say something good about one person, then everybody else gets jealous or people get upset, because it's a mindset, and everybody's doing great things. So I think we've got to make it a habit, and that may take some time of being very intentional in doing that, to celebrate each other and to talk about the good things. I'll give you a good example. There was something from, I think the Chambers Principals Institute or something the other day I saw and I sent a link to my principal real quick, and I said, I think you should really register for this. I think you'd be great at it. She said back, she's like, I've been in it for the last year. And I was like, that's great. But I didn't know that, that was something, and maybe because I was new this year at the school, but I thought, this is what I want to know, these things. I want to know what my colleagues are doing, and I want to celebrate those things. So I thought that was a really good example. But also on another note, and I've said this before at board meetings, I think we do tend to talk about the things that are wrong, but I think we're at that point too, that teachers are so frustrated that it's really hard. And I'm constantly telling people, we can't constantly tell others not to go into education, because I'm going to have hopefully grandchildren someday, and I want them to have high quality teachers. But I think half the problem is that the future teachers are sitting in our classrooms. We don't necessarily have to tell them what's wrong. They're seeing it for themselves. And especially by the time they get to the high school level, they see the frustrated teachers. They see the classrooms that still have, mold on the walls or in the windows, or the floors that are not even usable, or the whatevers, the lack of materials, the computers that are not working, the student behaviors that we actually have legislation that kind of ties our hand on what we can do about that. The future teachers see that for themselves. And I think that's also, unlike the CEO of the major corporation, their future employees are not in the building, possibly working, seeing all those things. So that, I think that makes a difference. And that's also what makes teaching unique, is that, we build for our own, which is what we should do, but we're also hindering ourselves because we're building our own and they're seeing the issues that are going on for themselves. So I think that's, I just wanted to throw those two things out there, but I'm like you. I think we've got to celebrate each other and the good things way more than what we do.
Allison, you remind me of, I heard the National Teacher of the Year, Juliana Urtubey, speak in November. And she said something really similar to what you're talking about, which to me, it would just rock me how direct and profound it was. When she was talking about the challenges that we have recruiting people into the teaching profession. She said that starts when, to your point, it starts when students see their own teacher. Mm-hmm. And what she said, to address the teacher shortage, our students need to see their teachers thrive. Mm-hmm. Not just for me. Our students need to see their teachers thrive, and they're not thriving right now. So I guess that leads me to what would a policy agenda look like that was focused on seeing teachers thrive? Mm-hmm. What would that include, and how incredible would it be if we made that our focus, seeing teachers thrive?
Yeah, and Commissioner Glass, Vicki Morardi, she commented and said she agreed completely with your comments there, and mentioned the part about advocacy and promoting the positives in public ed. And I think when we hear that word advocacy, I lead a lot of that up for our group. A lot of people limit advocacy to emailing your legislator or calling a legislator line, but advocacy starts much sooner in the equation. It's building those positive relationships so that those decision makers, when they go to Frankfort, they understand what's happening in local schools and local communities. If you're reaching out to your legislator now about a bill, you've already missed the ball, right? Like you that chance to help them understand those local issues. And so I think that's where this group and other groups around the state are continuing to make strides. But just I can't help but imagine the power that we have if we all become true advocates for public education in building relationships and doing legislative outreach when it comes to those. It's a very powerful voice, and we've seen the influence of that, but I think we have a lot more growth to do, and I think bringing in those positives are a big part of lifting that up. I mean, what policymaker doesn't want to be a part of something positive going on in their community of schools? And that's the beautiful thing that we saw at the beginning of COVID, right? Teachers were heroes. They were doing all sorts of things that weren't a part of their job description because that's what the time and the moment called for. We know teachers do that all the time, but we were front and center. But then as this pandemic continued to wear on, public perception has changed a lot. So I think I think that's that pivotal moment we're at now. What's the future of public education? What's the future of schools? And what do we want from society and schools and students? And I think we're in a really pivotal moment for changing where we've been in education, because I think sometimes we've gotten stuck on all the wrong things because of policies that come down from the top.
Right. Well, I would love to see us shift. I mean, you look at the legislative agenda that we're working on right now. Well, it's budget and funding, which is good, and we see some progress around that. But we really don't see a focused effort that's around making sure that our educators have what they need, and that we really have caught up to the funding inadequacies of the past several years, nor have we taken the steps necessary to keep up with the inflationary pressure that we have now. The governor's budget gets closer to that. The House budget takes some steps in the right direction. But I think it even goes beyond the funding issues. We got to think about how the pension system, the value of that has been weakened over time for new educators. The real increases to healthcare costs that are now carried by our public sector employees that directly impact their take-home pay. And then going beyond that into how can we create experiences in the course of a professional educator's life where they have different leadership capacities other than leaving teaching. Because that's usually what you do. If you want to grow as a professional, you get further and further away from teaching. And I would love to see us get to some ways that we can create leadership roles for our educators that keep them connected to teaching, and get really serious about acknowledging, lifting up, and showcasing the heroes and the miracles that we have in public education.
Absolutely. Teacher leadership, as you know, is right on my heart there. And so I have lots of ideas I'd be willing to share sometime. But yes, these are all things. I think the number one thing, I'll be really honest with you, I think if we could change anything in the public education system for teachers specifically, is the contract that says, and the little words in there that says, as other duties as assigned. That is hindering a lot of the ability for teachers to really be happy right now. And I think they're overworked, they're stressed, they're being asked to put in hours on top of hours of work that they feel like they're not being compensated for. And maybe an increase in salary would help with that. I'm not sure. But it's different, and it's expressed differently at different levels and in different districts. You know, how administrators read into that and how far they take it is different for different people. And I hear from teachers constantly, that's usually the number one thing, is they feel like they're being asked to do more and more and more without any kind of limitations to that. If there was some way we could even, change that language to be more specific, if we could use our site-based decision-making councils to help be able to really define what the teacher day would look like and should look like and how long it should be. I teach 6 class periods a day. I have 1 planning period, but I have 20 special education students on my caseload. I can't possibly do all of the paperwork and, the observations and the this and that I need to do for those students during the day that are outside of teaching them. I want to be there teaching them. So I spend hours and hours at night and at other times and on weekends doing the paperwork that goes with it. And that's been accepted for a long, long time. But that paperwork has, I would venture to say, quadrupled since I started teaching 20 years ago. So the expectations, not even just paperwork, but how many games you have to work or how many meetings you have to have and how much PD that sometimes, quite frankly, isn't even relevant to what that person is teaching in the classroom that we have to attend. And I think that's where the majority of the frustration comes from. Mm-hmm. When, a couple of years ago, I'd get a message from someone in the state maybe 2 or 3 times a year saying, hey, what happens if I leave my job, in the middle of the year? What happens to my certification? Can you lead me in the right direction? I'm getting 2 to 3 of those messages a week now. And that's scary. And a lot of them, it's not what will happen. A lot of them are as Friday's my last day, one way or the other. Who do I need to talk to? And it's scary. And I think the majority of them, not once has anyone ever specified, I don't get paid enough for this. When they've messaged them. And I'm not downplaying that we need a salary increase, because we most definitely do. But it's usually, I can't handle the workload and mentally I'm done. And I'm not doing for my students what I know I need to do. And that's sad to hear, because I think many of them are probably excellent educators. But I think that one thing, and I don't know how we fix that, or if that is even something we can look at it doing with legislation, or how that gets handled. But I think that one thing is possibly the biggest thing for educators right now.
Yeah, I think one of the contributing factors to that is when you underfund education for several years, mm-hmm. And what you end up doing. So, if you got to stabilize your employee's salary. So maybe they don't get a raise, so you freeze them, or they get a small raise. But that cost doesn't usually go in reverse, right? The cost that you're paying to your employees doesn't go in reverse. It goes up a little or a lot, depending on what you're able to do. So when you freeze or reduce education spending, what school districts have to do is start eliminating positions. And so what gets eliminated first is, you look at the district office and you say, okay, what specialists can I get rid of? What coaches can I get rid of? What other sort of supporting roles can I get rid of? What administrative staff can we do without? And so that goes really quick, because in spite of all the rhetoric, the amount of money that's in a central office compared to the whole operations of district is a small fraction of the whole entire district cost. So you get through that, you go through your central office, which doesn't take very long. And then the next step, you start looking at your other operational. So it's your transportation, your technology, your food service. Where can you make cutbacks and eliminate there? And then you finally get to schools, and then you start eliminating paraprofessional positions, or you start cutting back on your art, music, physical education teachers. You start eliminating any specialists or interventionists that you have. All of those cuts along the way are designed to protect the classroom teacher. As the last sort of line of defense, right? Because you got to have them to make school work. You got to have that classroom teacher. But all along the line, as these reductions are made and all the points that I talk about, the need for those services is still there. And so increasingly that gets shifted over to the classroom teacher as the person that has to carry that weight. They're the one who has to do that. When you don't have an interventionist or a paraprofessional or someone to lead professional development, then that gets shifted to the classroom teacher. They're the ones who have to pick up the slack and do that. So I do think there's a correlation or connection between underfunding or defunding education and the increased workload that our classroom teachers that are sticking it out into public education are feeling.
Sure, absolutely.
Commissioner, we could probably talk for hours on end, but a lot of topics left that we'd intended. So I'm going to do one more topic. Allison will give you one more, and we'll get closing comments from Commissioner Glass. Commissioner, in March of 20, we entered the pandemic. Kentucky was very lucky that we shut down Friday and a lot of schools started NTI on Monday. Wasn't necessarily what NTI was intended for, but it gave us a mechanism in which we had some version of continuity. Obviously things changed and NTI has changed. And now all of a sudden here we are in January of 2022 and we're at the highest positivity rates. We're red all over the state based on those. Things keep changing. Where are we at with NTI right now, and what's the future of what's going to be happening?
Well, if I knew that, I would not be talking to you. I'd be on the plane to Vegas to put down some money on something. If anybody could predict, what's going to happen next when it comes to COVID and NTI, I wish I had them on my staff. What I think is going to happen is that we are likely to see the increasing spread of Omicron, increasing disruption to schools, mostly because not only with students being out, but staffing challenges. So you're going to have staff that are going to get infected or exposed. And every principal and every superintendent on an almost daily basis is going to have to do the calculus. Can I open the buildings today? Can I safely open the buildings today? And so we saw last week, Jefferson County did that analysis, and they said we don't have enough people to safely operate our schools, so we're going to have to shift to NTI. We saw that happen in Warren County too. So I think we're going to see that happen, continue to happen around the state. I think our schools are going to work very hard to try and stay open, and if they possibly can, they will. But they're already really thin, just in terms of staffing available, as Allison was talking about earlier. But substitute staffing is low. We've been skating right on the edge of can we continue to operate transportation systems. All of these things are just they have very thin margins. There's not a lot of duplication in any of these roles. So when you start losing too many, you just have to do the calculation and say we can't continue, and then you have to shift to NTI. I think based on what we saw in South Africa, and look, everybody's an armchair epidemiologist now. Like everybody reads the latest story and says that they can figure out what's going to happen. So here's mine, right, which is as good as anybody else's, I guess. I think that we'll see a peak in the next month or 6 weeks, because that's what we saw in the nations where Omicron came faster than it did in the United States. So we've got some more up to do, some leveling off, and we're already starting to see some stories of it leveling off in some states, or the increase. But now it's got to start bending back down. We haven't seen that happen yet. But if it follows the pattern that we've seen in other countries, that will start to happen here in the United States as well. And so I hope that this is the last Greek letter that we get. when it comes to COVID, and we now have about 1 in 5 Americans has been infected with COVID-19. Eventually, the virus runs out of places to go, and you have more and more people vaccinated. You have more and more people that have had it. The virus just stops running out of people that it can infect, and that's when you start seeing that exponential decline. I'm not sure when that's going to happen. I hope that it's sooner than later, but I think another month, 6 weeks, we have to keep navigating through all the disruptions in staffing and NTI. And then hopefully we'll get to some level of stability. When we hit this summer and we had those really low levels, I really thought we were through it like everybody else, and started to wonder about what was I going to do with this bowl of masks that we have at home. Well, I'm sure glad we held on to them. I hope that we're not going to need them much more than the next few weeks. But that's my prediction, Jamie, about what I think is going to happen. But you're the health guru on with us. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I can just say I appreciate all your advocacy and proponent of and I think that's the thing people fail to realize when it comes to masking and the mitigation efforts and vaccinations. We wouldn't even be having this conversation about having a possibility of in-person school without those things. And those things have been successful. Our school districts have done a great job of embracing those. And I think we're going to have to do that a little while longer. So, let's hope that everybody was hoping for a new year and a really new year. But we've got some things to still go in this pandemic a little bit and battle through.
Yeah, we were asked over the holidays, KTE was asked, what recommendations do we have for schools about Omicron? And we said it's the same recommendations that we've had, whatever the first letter was, to Delta to now, is that the mitigation strategies that we've been employing in our schools have largely been effective at keeping the school from being the place that the virus is transmitted. Now, like Superintendent Polio said in Jefferson County, we're not getting a lot of help out in the community when it comes to stopping the mitigation of the virus. But we have seen that schools, if they follow the right procedures, they can largely be safe places for in-person learning.
Dr. Glass, a couple of comments have come up in our in the comment section under our live here, and something that you and I've talked about recently, and I just wanted you to take a moment to be able to clarify. And we'll talk about a couple of different things here, but NTI days that were given just for COVID, those expired in December, but there was a provision in there about whether or not teachers had to report to school. And I know you and I spoke about that and we had to get some clarification. So I'll give you a moment. And then I have another thing on this that I wanted to get some clarification for our districts as well.
Yeah. So in the special session that the legislature had in September, they passed a law around NTI and remote learning days. They gave districts more NTI days, and they gave districts a limited number of remote learning days. So you could close down a building or a classroom instead of closing down the whole district. They put an expiration date on the provisions around the extra days. I said December 31st, all of this goes away, which it did. But they did not, they also, in that law, they required that if an NTI day is taken for COVID-related reasons, they said if that happens, then the educators have to perform their duties on site in the school buildings unless they have COVID themselves. They did not put an expiration date on that provision. So it is now state law and persists beyond just that special session law. I want to be clear that KTE did not ask for that. I specifically asked for that not to be included. I do not think it was a good idea. And honestly, I don't think it's in line with the legislature was really pounding their chest about local control and decision-making when it came to managing COVID. But this is a very micro-managerial way of from the State House directing where employees have to work that I think was inconsistent with what the rest of what they did in the law. But nevertheless, it is what's on the books right now. But if you have an NTI day for weather, which I think all of our schools will be closed tomorrow, so we may have dodged it with weather closures because of the storm right now. But if you have a weather-related closure, that provision does not apply. So you could have educators working from home on a weather-related day, ice or snow. But when it comes to a COVID-related issue, you have to be working in the building.
Correct. And it is my understanding, even on the weather-related NTI days, that's still a local decision, because I know we still have some local districts that are deciding to bring educators in the building, so they can still make that decision. But on the NTI for COVID,
sure.
it is legislation that they have to report. I'm not sure I quite understand the thinking of, hey, there's icy roads and it's dangerous. We don't need you to be out on the roads. But hey, there's a pandemic in your building, but please go ahead and go right on in. I'm not sure I quite agree with that. I'm on line with you there, but it is what it is for now. And hopefully moving forward, we can maybe make some changes on that. The other one that continues to come up. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a huge hardship on educators, especially single parent educators, or even families. Like my wife is a teacher in Fayette County, and if they shift to NTI, I'm going to have to change my whole schedule because I'm going to be the one home with our kids. And so that's how it's going to impact us at home. So I think there's layers of unintended consequences that this requirement has, and it's going to hit different families in different ways.
Absolutely. And the other thing that still keeps coming up, and we've been dealing with this for quite some time, but I know different districts, I'm still hearing from teachers that they're looking into it differently and reading into the guidance from KDE or legislation differently, are COVID days. So it is my understanding, and help me if I'm incorrect, but if someone is quarantined because they've been exposed, and a public school employee is quarantined because they've been exposed to COVID, then we as KBE helped provide some days to be able to give them the time to stay home while they wait on that testing, if they are vaccinated, while they wait on their test results. But if they test positive, because of sick day legislation and stuff, then sick days have to be used because they are technically sick. So those are sick days. And I know we've got a lot of teachers that still think that COVID days should cover that. But at the same time, local boards of education can have something passed or come up with a regulation that they can gift, for lack of better words, extra sick days to people who test positive with COVID. Is that correct?
No, you covered it exactly right. There actually is a law on the books that goes, I think, back to the 1950s that says that Kentucky should have a regulation around quarantining in schools, but no, we didn't have one. So the Board of Education that you sit on is actually the first board that put one on the books. We did it through an emergency regulation for COVID, and then we have the full regulation that's going through the regular process right now. But it's just as you described. If you're vaccinated and you are quarantined for COVID, then you have received pay for those days, just like if they were sick days. If you actually get COVID, then your sick days would pay for that. And districts do not have to offer just the state minimum. They can go above and beyond and offer more days on top of that. And several of our districts have done that.
Do we know how many right off? Do you know of a number of how many districts have decided to do that?
I do not. They're not required to tell us or inform KDE if they change their local policy. So I don't know. I know here in Fayette County, it is something that they did here.
Yeah. I knew Fayette County had. Thank you. That was something that just kept coming up, and I'd already had several people commenting and messaging me asking me the same thing, and I continue to get those, and I'm sure I will still get those questions from people because everyone wants to interpret things differently, and it is confusing because it is, so many policies and regulations have changed so much over the last couple of years because of COVID. So it is hard for people to keep up with when they're busy in their classrooms every day. We thank you for being here tonight, Dr. Glass, and helping us keep up to date with this, and we may have to bring you back before it's over with, but we do appreciate you and all that you do in Frankfort to help us with this legislation during the session.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Allison. I appreciate and respect both of you so much. To know that there are so many educators that rely on you for the latest information. So we're grateful for your support, and just keep clarifying things and keep up the hard work that you do as well.
Thank you. Everyone have a safe evening out there and enjoy the snow.
Good night.